Welcome to the church development presentation on visioning before a church capital campaign. And our recording has started. And with any luck, I will be joined by my co-presenters. Oh, there we go. Yay, Jennifer Gutierrez, please turn on your video.
So I am looking here. Dennis, it looks like there is, I have microphone speaker, but there's nothing here for me to turn on video. So I'm wondering if you need to enable it somehow.
Well, that's a super question. As I look at my screen, Jennifer, I have the capacity to mute or remove permission to talk or chat, hide non-video participants, or remove.
I have no video here where I can add myself to video. I just have the mute or unmute.
Okay. Well, we have 5 minutes before we start. So, what would you think, Jennifer, if we proceed on this basis where we have your voice, but not your video?
That would be just fine if that works for you, Dennis.
Okay, well, thank you for your flexibility, and I'm overjoyed that I'm able to tap your expertise to share with the churches that will be joining us.
It is a pleasure.
And thank you also, Jennifer, for taking a look at the slides and adding content wherever you see fit. And in 4 minutes, we will go live and I will share my screen. But in the interim, as we proceed today, I would invite you to share case studies from your considerable history about visioning processes that have worked as well as failures that have not worked. So in my history, we have a regular experience of starting a capital campaign where there is no consensus on the vision, where we have to pause the capital campaign and get an expert like you to come in to engage the congregation in the visioning process. And that has led to just considerable frustration on my part. So in your experience, Jennifer, I mean, what percent of congregations out there actually are deliberate about a collective visioning process at any point in the life of the congregation? How often do you see that?
Well, Dennis, I think that's a really great question. So I would say that every faith family that is looking at building a church or renovating or expanding its church, or maybe even changing locations, they all really deeply think about what they want to see happen. But in terms of actually working with a facilitator and really putting together a thoughtful process that has a beginning and a middle and an end, I'd say maybe 5 to 10% of parishes.
Oh my, really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's that rare.
It is. And I think it's just that the reality of parish life is that there are a lot of robust ministries happening. You have a pastor who is really caring for the people that are attending the church or parish. You have people that are very, very involved in community building and their faith and serving others. And so there's just always a lot going on at the vast majority of parishes that I've worked with. So I think it's just natural that having a facilitator or having a visioning just seems like one more unnecessary step.
So most parishes don't go through the process because it seems like an extra added burden.
Yes, that's
You know,
exactly right.
in my parish, the most common thing I encounter is we've always done it that way, so let us continue to do it that way. That seems to be the biggest impediment to doing anything thoughtful and deliberate. And unfortunately, it sounds like that's shared with most other parishes.
Exactly. And I think you have another thing is that you have a lot of institutional knowledge in the parishes and people that have been there for a really long time. And so they think, well, I know what we've already done, and we can just, like you said, keep on doing what we've already been doing. It works really, really well, or maybe we're just comfortable with the way that it works. And we really don't want to disrupt how we've been doing things for the last couple of years. So that's another issue too, is just that comfort zone of learning to do something new.
Well, exiting our comfort zone is the eternal human foible. I'm a big fan of Daniel Kahneman, who got the Nobel Prize for creating the field of behavioral economics. And that's the main thing that I learned from him, is that we are sort of stuck in our comfort zone. So it's the top of the hour. Let us begin, and let me formally welcome those people who have joined us. I am Dennis Green, and my guest presenter is Jennifer Gutierrez. And unfortunately, due to my technological incompetence, I am unable to capture her video for this presentation, but her voice will be with us throughout our presentation. And Jennifer, I'm just so honored that you have joined us and you're willing to share your decades of experience. So thank you, Jennifer. Now, in a moment, I will ask you to introduce yourself because I have a wonderful slide that presents some of the faith-based organizations that you have worked with. The title of our presentation is drawn from Proverbs 29:18, where there is no vision, the people perish. Now, this sentiment is not just a sentiment, but a sound management technique that we think is important because it needs to happen before a parish ever launches a church capital campaign. Great management books like Good to Great would say, do it whether or not you need a capital campaign, because therein lies the success of the organization. Now, you'll be able to share this webinar with anybody on your committee or in your parish. We are recording it. You'll be able to tap the wisdom of Jennifer Gutierrez. By the way, you can type in your questions into the chat function and I will see those. You can also send me a text. My phone number is under number 5 on your screen. I've got my phone handy. And we will address your questions as we proceed. We'll be in this webinar for about 20 minutes, but we've got about 20 hours worth of wisdom we'd like to share with you. Church development was started many, many years ago. I know you probably think that's when he was born. No, but almost. We've helped hundreds of churches raise millions of dollars, and it has been a joy doing that. We take a very different approach. We think the ask ought to be based in prayer and discernment, not pressure. Our work is based in scripture and years of research and experience. Usually our parishes increase weekly giving for years afterwards, and we start a planned giving program as well. So our work proceeds from scripture, and I like this because everything we have is a gift from God, and it is our responsibility to be a conduit for those blessings. So this is our agenda for today. It will be action-packed. It'll give you action items that you can implement immediately upon concluding this webinar. We'll cover what is a parish vision, why have it, the pros and the cons, and then how do we proceed. Now, this is me, been doing this for more than 30 years and raised lots of money, written 4 books on the subject and my academic research. And I've had a lot of successes and a lot of failures as well. Now, the highlight of today is Jennifer Gutierrez, who's got several decades of experience as a strategic thinking, visioning consultant. And I want to really differentiate that between strategic planning, because that's thought of as a cold corporate activity. And the visioning experience should be a great deal more organic. Jennifer, would you take a moment and introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Dennis, for having me. And thank you to all of you for participating in this webinar. Dennis is just an incredible expert, and it is an honor and privilege for him to ask me to share some time with you this morning. As Dennis mentioned, I lead a company called JAG Consulting. We are almost 25 years old and have a tremendous staff that serves parishes and faith-based churches and organizations across the country. JAG Consulting actually started as a firm that served corporate public affairs and nonprofit clients, but about 10 years ago, we decided to shift and serve completely faith-based clients and have loved absolutely every minute of it. I work with Dennis on a collaborative called 4 Pillars Collaborative, which focuses on building, renovating, expanding churches with a visioning consultant, that would be me, financing, fundraising, and an architecture firm that we collaborate with. And again, just have about 25 years of experience that actually ranges from public relations work in the Guatemalan Development Foundation in Guatemala City, PR firm, large PR firm here in the US. And again, before I started my own firm about a little over 22 years ago. And so Dennis has put up a slide there that just shows you what I wanted to do was just put down some of the companies that JAG Consulting has served, in addition to faith-based entities and dioceses, parishes, universities, and so on. So that's just a smattering, that's just a sample of who we've worked with. And I'm just so pleased to be able to serve you and talk with you today.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. So just by looking at these organizations, I can see you've worked with very small faith-based institutions like a local parish, as well as very large, a college and a diocese as well. Am I right?
That is absolutely correct. We've worked with actually a couple of large educational institutions, but also parishes or churches that are smaller in size, significantly smaller. So that's one of the things that we really love to do is tailor our services to exactly what the needs are of the individual client, no matter how small or how large.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate all that expertise. Okay, so this is our agenda. We're going to cover those 3 points. And as we talk, Jennifer, let's bring examples from our real life experience. And let's just start with number 1. For someone who's not been through the process, what is a parish vision and how is it different than and more than strategic planning?
So Dennis, I love talking about this because in my experience, whenever somebody mentions the word strategic planning, all of the sudden, sometimes these negative emotions and reactions start coming from that person. So I want to be very clear about what I'm talking about right now. And that is really looking at, and I think about it more in terms of a visioning retreat for your parish. So what does that mean? What is a vision? The simplest way to say it is if you think about the cover on a magazine. Let's say that the Time magazine was naming your parish Parish of the Year 5 years from now.
Mhm,
what would you want that headline to be
mhm,
on that Time Magazine Parish of the Year? So a parish vision is really an image in words of what success looks like.
mm,
And so that's the first thing.
mm,
Secondly, again, it's based in consensus.
mm,
Really what we do is again, during that visioning retreat, and the retreat isn't necessarily 1 week long, it can be a half a day, depending on the parish. But
mhm,
we really help you, all of you, get situated with exactly where you are.
mm,
Restating your purpose, what brought all of you together.
mhm,
We look at maybe some data and some pre-work that you've already done, because we want to honor the work that's already been done
mm,
before we conduct this retreat with you.
mhm.
And then we really talk about a key question that is frequently missed, and that is, why do you want to do this now?
Ah,
What is it about now um,
ah,
that makes this time the right time for you to do this?
mm.
And that seems like a simple question, but it's really, really an important question.
Oh,
So that's a little bit about with a little bit of information on how we start with this.
okay, all right. So I've got a text, a question from an an old client who I've worked with in several capital campaigns. And this is a pastor asking, isn't this my job? Or should I not be the one to develop the vision and then present it to the parish? And I mean, that's a great question. And I think that's how a lot of leaders see themselves, that it's their job. Well, here item B is based in consensus, and you just said retreat. I mean, you're implying that lots of people would be involved. Am I right?
I absolutely love that question. Thank you very, very much for asking it. I think that you are absolutely right that a pastor does establish the vision for the parish in terms of that leadership vision. But in terms of a specific vision toward building a church, um, that is something that is based on consensus, where a group of people, a group of stakeholders in the parish will talk about what they're looking at in terms of the church. For example, there are based on the area where your church is located, you may have a high percentage of children in that church and young families,
Mhm.
or maybe you have a lot of well-established families. So that's a great question. When we talk about the vision, as it's couched in terms of building a new church or expanding or renovating,
Mhm.
we're looking at what ministries and what the focus will be for the next 20 years
Mhm.
in terms of the direction that church will go in serving its parishioners. Does
Mhm.
that answer? I hope that answers the question.
Oh, I think that's great. And just as you're talking, I'm thinking two brains are better than one. And a pastor might be a genius, but boy, if you get more people involved, they're going to have more and greater insights that can be brought to the table. So that definition of success in the future is going to be more comprehensive and thoughtful. So this is really a helpful dialogue. Okay, next question. Why have a parish vision? So and in particular, what happens if you don't? Okay, do you mind addressing that? I mean, I hate to be negative, but I am a delicate flower and I want to avoid failure. I want to be a success in everything that I do. So give me the sales pitch. Why do we need to do this and do it now?
So the short answer, Dennis, is that if you have a vision, so first comes the vision, that strategic thinking, and then that action plan of how to get there. So the vision establishes where you want to go, and then we look at where you are, where you want to be, and how to fill in the gaps to get there. And so that's why you have a parish vision, because it very, very succinctly tells you where you want to be in the next 5 or 10 years, and then we help you get there. And on this slide, of course, these are all really important things. You share that definition of success, you get agreement, and also that shared ownership piece is really, really important. in my experience, because there's so many tremendous people at churches and parishes involved in ministry, sometimes people can get burned out. And sometimes there may be 5 to 7 people in the parish that are really the leaders and maybe do most of the work in leading. And so having a shared vision really develops that leadership chain, that leadership circle. It builds that, kind of going to corporate language, that leadership pipeline, so that you have a lot of different people that can carry the torch toward that shared vision.
Well, if that was the only outcome, that would be worth it. At my parish, as you said, it's much worse than the 80-20 rule. It does seem like there's 20 people who do most of the work. And boy, if this is a way to facilitate leadership development, as you call it, the leadership pipeline, if that was the only outcome, I would say, let's do this. And let's do it like every other year or every third year to increase the pipeline of potential future leaders. Because it does seem to be we recycle the same people through the same positions. And boy, I would like new blood, particularly, my oldest child is now 37 and is church shopping. And I'm happy to report. And once he gets married and settles down and starts a family, they'll be more active in their church and elevate to some church volunteer position. And wouldn't this be a great way to introduce a young member, a millennial, to the life? It's a stewardship function, really. We share the ownership of our church.
Well, and I think a lot of people, in contrast to a capital campaign where you can see and feel the outcomes of a capital campaign, a lot of people want to know what the concrete outcomes are, the tangible outcomes that they will receive from doing a parish visioning retreat. And what you'll come out with is, again, that shared definition of success. You'll have consensus. You will avoid individuals possibly sabotaging the process in the future because they weren't involved or they didn't understand. There will be an action plan in place. You'll have people who are excited and engaged and ready and willing to serve in some capacity to make that a reality. And it will get you to your goal a lot faster.
That totally makes sense. And I really like this book that you and I have discussed, Good to Great by Jim Collins, because it assessed over 1,000 publicly traded companies over about a 20-year period and found 11 that were doing very well, who embraced the idea of having a vision and proceeding based on that shared definition of success, agreement on their direction. And one of the things I remember is that those 11 companies outperformed the market by a multiple of 8 times better than other companies. And they attributed that to the clarity of vision. Now, I know that's a small group of companies and it's one study, but boy, if there's ever any key to success, I want to totally borrow that for my church to be a success. So it's kind of cool to hear your experience as a planning facilitator matches the experience from this academic research. Now, I, as a fundraiser, item E on your agenda, my way of serving churches is to manage church capital campaigns. And I have, I've served more than 200 churches, and I have discovered those churches that do have a visioning process before a church capital campaign raise a lot more money than those that do not. So if my goal is to raise money for the church, I want to do the visioning process because it will result in a greater level of generosity. That's my greatest hope. So you, Jennifer Gutierrez, are one of the keys to my successful capital campaigns. You're a very important person to me. All right, now let's get super specific. Next item on our agenda. And we're moving towards closer. So if you have other questions, please do text me or put them in the chat box. You have access now to one of the nation's greatest resources, Jennifer Gutierrez. But so number 3, please walk us through in some specific terms, what does it look like when a parish says, Jennifer, come on board, lead us through the visioning process?
That's a great question. And I'm a very linear person, but I'm actually going to start with E, and that is the facilitator. So this is an example. Why use a facilitator? Why use a facilitator that's outside of your parish? Because I know with parish councils and finance councils, you have a lot of wonderful expertise on those councils. Why not just have a professional do it from that council? The reason is you really need somebody that can come and look at things with clear eyes, that can do something for you that's not on a volunteer basis, and that has no biases whatsoever with the process. I've worked with entities before where they've tried to bring in somebody who was a volunteer that was already facilitated, or that had already had a relationship with that church. And a couple of things frequently happen. Number one, they typically are not able to facilitate the session in an unbiased way, and can actually derail the session because they have history with people maybe in that room. History can be good history or can be bad history. So just that idea of bias from somebody that's embedded in the parish is something to consider. I think the second thing is that a paid facilitator, again, will give you 100% effort and time, whereas a volunteer will fit you in where they can. So I think that covers C and E. The role of prayer, we always start with prayer. We always start with discernment. We start with prayer. And that's just really embedded in the process. One example, so I mentioned I worked with corporations for the first 10 years of our company's existence. And I was working with a large Catholic educational institution. And now a good friend, my client had said, Jennifer, this sounds too corporate. This language is too corporate. We really need to incorporate prayer. We did a 15-minute litany prior to the beginning of the process. So that's embedded in everything that we do. And the role of the pastor is critical, because all of your parishioners will look to you. They will look to you and your tone in terms of excitement about this process. If a pastor is excited and engaged, the entire parish will follow. If the pastor seems and appears to be overworked, which I know all pastors are overworked, but if they portray this as a task or a chore that just needs to get done to get to the next step, then you will see that attitude reflected in your leadership. So the pastor is critical in whether or not this process, this approach succeeds.
Okay, so the role of the pastor is critical, but I'm also hearing you say, don't have the pastor be the planning facilitator.
Yes, I would recommend that not be the case, just again, because I think it's helpful too for the pastor to be able to listen as an observer and as a participant in the process, and to have input, because as a facilitator is to have no input in the process whatsoever in terms of swaying it from one way or another, or to provide any goals or objectives or suggestions. Now, a facilitator guides if the group is stuck on something. The facilitator then expertly guides them out of whatever they're stuck on and facilitates that conversation. But I would think that a pastor would want to contribute actively to the content of the discussion. And as a facilitator, they would not be able to do that.
Okay, well, I've got another question that fits that perfectly. What do you do when someone talks too much?
There are a lot of ways. I'll give you some of my secrets, but as a facilitator, there are different things that I do, both verbally, but also with my body, as somebody is speaking. So if somebody's talking a lot, I will redirect the conversation to others. I'll call on others, or I will physically move to that individual. And there are some facilitation secrets that I use in order to make sure that everybody is able to speak as much as they'd like to, and to contribute in the way that is most comfortable for them.
So you've encountered this problem before?
Yes, and there's some people that don't feel comfortable speaking in a large group, and I can see that they want to say something, but there are some things that happen in a group. There are power structures that happen in a group as well, where maybe somebody perceives that somebody else in the room has more authority than they would, and so they don't speak. So I do take the opportunity after the session sometimes to approach those people just to make sure that there isn't something else they wanted to add.
Okay, that's great. That's great that you're doing both sides, the people who talk too much and the people who talk too little. I really appreciate that sensitivity. Okay, another question I've got: in this post-COVID world, how can a planning process like this improve the community cohesiveness of our parish?
There's so many ways that this can do that. In this post-COVID world, it re-engages people. It brings new people to the table, but I also think we have tremendous opportunity. On one hand, having Zoom webinars like this is an incredible opportunity for Dennis and I to be able to talk with you about the value of this. But by the same token, people yearn personal contact.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this is a great time to start these conversations if you feel like your parish is in the right place, because people are yearning to come together again, and they're yearning to go back to church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my personal sense. Where I go to church, Sunday we had a pancake breakfast, and that's first one we've been to since the start of COVID, and it was booming. Sure, people like pancakes, but I think people really like the social interaction that comes with being part of a faith community. So I can really see what you're saying. If I'm going to be part of this and I come to a town hall meeting or a retreat and I'm talking about the vision of the parish with around a table with a handful of people, I'm probably going to meet people that I haven't met yet, and probably get to know them better. I can totally see how this would be very healthy.
And there are different levels of participation too, Dennis. We haven't gotten into the nuts and bolts of how this works. But for example, we like to have an opportunity for parish-wide feedback. Then we enter, so there are all kinds of different opportunities for stakeholders throughout the parish to have feedback. There's a survey we do at the beginning with stakeholders parish-wide, and then the actual sessions. Some parishes like to have individual listening sessions. Other parishes, we have basically our focused visioning retreat with about 15 to 20 individuals in the parish selected by the pastor, that really then put together that vision and that action plan. And then there's an opportunity once again for parishioners and key stakeholders to provide feedback. So there's feedback all along the way. So there are different ways to be engaged, even if you're not in the room during that visioning retreat.
I see. Okay, I got another. How long does this take?
That's a great question. So I'll tell you, it really depends on the parish and what the parish has done to prepare thus far. Basically, we do an assessment, but I can tell you about some key timeframes.
Mhm.
The actual visioning retreat, I can do a speed retreat in half a day, but my preference would be to do 1 day or 2 half days
Okay.
for the visioning retreat, including an action plan, a first-year action plan.
Mhm.
The survey ahead of time, it really, we can design a survey based upon feedback from the pastor and send that out and do the analysis relatively quickly. I think the biggest thing is just the communication leading up to it with the parish and preparing them for that so that they know it's coming. And just that making sure that there's communication streamlined in and out. So I would say
Mhm.
from research to the final visioning report and plan, I would say 3 to 4 months,
3 to 4 months. Okay.
depending on, because there, again, life at the parish doesn't stop. There are lots of things happening at the parish while this is going on. So usually, again, 3 to 4 months would be about the right type of timeline.
All right, this is great. This is very helpful. Now, in a minute, I would like you to share how people can contact you. Are you willing to talk to people for free and just give them a little bit of your
Oh,
time?
of course. I provide a complimentary consultation with pastors, or if you have a couple of people from your parish council that would like to talk with me, I do give a complimentary consultation, and then we look at what your needs are, and then we could go from there. So absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much. All right, I've got one. Pardon me, another Q&A question. Do you promote feasibility studies, and how do you handle the comment, "This is not a good time to conduct a campaign"?
So, Dennis, I am going to turn over the feasibility study question to you,
Mhm.
because we don't do the feasibility study. What we do, and terminology is used differently. So I just want to make sure what we typically do is a research assessment. We do an assessment.
Mhm.
And so that question about, why isn't this the right time? Well, there are typically, for the research assessment that we do, there are different categories of the questions. Usually it can be anywhere between a 10 and 20-minute survey, where we would then have a question after that that asks why or for what reason.
Mhm.
So we are able to get all of that data. So we would have answers to that question, to why there isn't a good time, because
Okay,
the survey would be designed to find out the why.
very good. Now I will tell you from our perspective, we always recommend a feasibility study, and we always get this comment from some people: "Now is not a good time." Now, we have two different ways of evaluating that kind of feedback. One from looking at our history of church capital campaigns and feasibility studies, and the other is looking at academic research. And I really like Gallup polling, their instrument, the ME25, and you can Google it and look it up. It's an assessment of church engagement. And in the old days, we used to think of churches as a third, a third, and a third. A third are regulars, 1/3 of your congregation is occasional, and 1/3 are Christmas and Easter only. But those numbers have changed, where it's now 15% are in the inner core, and the middle core has grown to 50%, and the outer is about 35%. But one of the interesting things I discovered is that about 1% of any congregation population they title them CAVE, which is consistently against virtually everything. which we sure have those people in my parish, and I think every parish does. And so we anticipate that about 1% of your congregation is going to respond to any question with "now is not a good time." Now, we read every comment, and if it deviates from that 1% expectation, like let's say it's half the congregation, or even a third, boy, do we sure want to pay attention to that. So recently we completed a study in Iowa, and our recommendation was now is not a good time for you to do a capital campaign. We had about a third of the congregation that wanted to fix up the old church, and 2/3 that wanted to move ahead with building a new church. And that was enough of a division for us to say, just wait a minute, let's just put it off and do things like get a Jennifer Gutierrez in here to really think about the future direction of the parish. That's really the big question. So we said, don't do a capital campaign, do something else. In Overland Park a couple of years ago, pardon me, we recommended they not proceed with a capital campaign. We had a pastor that was upset about people showing up to services late. And when I was doing the feasibility study, several people told me this story. On Easter Sunday, the pastor locked the doors at 10:01. Church started at 10. He went around and locked the doors at 10:01. And I said, no, wait a minute, isn't that illegal? Isn't there a fire marshal thing? And I remember one of the guys was named, pardon me, Harold. He said, yes. And my daughter drove separately, and she was locked out, and she was texting me, Dad, the doors are locked. What's going on? This is crazy. I can't get in. And it was Easter Sunday. And so they had bigger problems than a capital campaign could fix. So my recommendation, there was enough widespread anger about that kind of thing that my recommendation was, don't do a capital campaign. You really need to work on peace within the parish, and that's way important than fixing up a building. So I look backwards in time at this exact question, and about 1 out of 20 of every feasibility studies that we do, we recommend no or not now. And you have to do that, because if you ever ignore that feedback and you proceed to do fundraising, people vote with their dollars. They're not going to give when they're a bigger issue. So that's not a mistake. It's like if you have a broken leg and you want to run a marathon tomorrow, well, no amount of ignoring the broken leg will allow you to run the marathon. It's just, you can't even take a step. So that's how I feel about a feasibility study. So to your point, Jennifer, having an objective, unbiased person lead the process is just so very important. And I'm glad I know you. I'm glad that you're here today. I'm glad I can tell churches that I work with about you, because your role is just so important. I feel like your role is one of those key resources. Now, I want you to give us 30 seconds on how people can get a hold of you and your staff at JAG Consulting.
Absolutely. So you can call me at 402-499-2401, or you can get a hold of me, and I'm sure Dennis will send out this information as well, at jgutierrez@jagconsultinginc.com.
And your website is?
Yes, it's jagconsultinginc.com.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thank you for your mission and ministry, and you're willing to give away information. I feel like you are one of those best practices, and I feel like it's just very important that parishes do the visioning process. So at church development, we give away a lot of resources that cost nothing, and you're the number one thing we want to point people towards. Do visioning, get a visioning facilitator. As part of the 4 Pillars Collaborative, I am also very close with a facilities cost estimator / church architect whose firm has been involved in hundreds, the construction and renovation of hundreds of churches. in a moment, I can get an estimate of any sort of cost for any sort of activity. We'll give that to you for free. We have a church loan expert who can tell you in a minute approximately how much money you can borrow and what those terms would be. I'm overjoyed that she is an expert that's on speed dial. And then I'm number 4, the capital campaign person that I will give away in a moment how much I think you can raise, and it's based on 30 years of experience and many different capital campaigns. So I like being able to give those resources away. If we can help your church in those regard, any of those, please give me a call. My information, as well as Jennifer's, will be on the email we send out with this recording of this webinar. So this is me. Call me, email me at any point in time. And that concludes our webinar today. So I'd like to say thank you so very much for joining us. Go forth, good luck, and God bless you. Bye-bye.